Hello everyone, now we begin with an image that might just punch the air from your lungs. The sun is barely a golden whisper on the Atlantic horizon, the sea is still groggy with dawn haze, and somewhere off the Florida coast, a 16-foot skiff bobs softly in the calm. The man aboard it, lean and silver-haired, reels in the morning's first red snapper with a practiced hand. The only sounds? The click of the reel. The lap of water on fiberglass. Peace, and then, chaos. The horizon splits open with the deep rumble of twin diesel engines. A luxury yacht, easily 150 feet of lacquered pride and floating indulgence, barrels forward. It's off course, faster than it should be, its hull knifing recklessly through the water like it's got something to prove. You want to yell. The old man does. His voice cracks over the sea, waving his arms. But that yacht, God, it doesn't even blink. In one breathless second, you hear the groan of fiberglass giving up. The skiff, his little home away from the memories, is chewed up like a toy under a bulldozer. The wave of impact throws him into the water like driftwood. And then silence. No stopping. No apology. Just an elegant white ghost gliding into the distance, indifferent. You probably won't survive a direct hit from a 100-ton yacht either, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop your city and local time in the comments, it really brings the stories closer. Now, relax, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get into today's story. The man in the water, clutching a floating cooler like a lifebuoy, is a Navy veteran. You wouldn't know it from his tattered jacket or sun-creased face. But his name is Mick Reardon. Served 22 years. Quiet guy. Lost a lot. And this boat, this tiny, beat-up skiff with its dented rod holders and coffee-stained cooler, was his one slice of stillness. Every Tuesday, without fail, he'd go out at dawn and come back by noon, holding one fish for the pan and one for the neighbor's cat. That day, he barely made it back at all. Some crabbers found him 2 miles off course, tangled in rope and seawater, coughing up pain. The Coast Guard arrived in under 10 minutes, but the yacht? Long gone. No mayday. No emergency call. Just slick oil on the water and a man bleeding from the past and the present all at once. The yacht's name? Celine. French for moon. Registered in the Cayman Islands, owned by someone who hadn't touched a compass in years. What mattered, though, was that it didn't stop. That someone with power, money, and a full cocktail bar on board had destroyed the only thing that kept this veteran sane, and didn't even slow down to look. Mick didn't scream. He didn't rage. When the local marina owner offered him a whiskey and a lawyer's card, he just shook his head and said, "I think I'll just go home." But that was the moment something invisible shifted. Like blood in the water. You see, Mick had served in the Pacific. Had friends who never came back. Had scars he never showed, and medals he never displayed. But more than that, he had respect. Not from strangers. From brothers. From people who saw that yacht, heard what happened, and whispered just 4 words. Not on our watch. And those 4 words? They echoed far. That evening, in a quiet bar on the Norfolk base, someone showed a grainy picture of the wrecked skiff. 2 hours later, a retired sonar tech named Carla forwarded it to a private group of veterans who organize aid for older service members. By 9 p.m., a retired SEAL from San Diego picked up the phone and called a friend still active duty, just to talk. Just to share, no orders. No official mission. But something was waking up, something big. The next morning, when Mick came out to sit on the dock with a coffee and a paperback, he looked up and froze. You would have 12 naval ships were now anchored in a half-circle 2 miles offshore. Destroyers. Frigates. A hospital ship. Even an old submarine that hadn't surfaced in months, not a word spoken. Not a flag flown. Just presence, and if you listened closely, you could hear the sea shift with their breath. Mick set his coffee down and said one word under his breath, "Damn." You sit on that dock beside Mick now, figuratively, of course, but it feels real. The early morning sun warms the damp wood beneath you. The coffee's long gone cold. And across the water, that silent ring of naval vessels still holds position like sentinels from another world. You think about what it takes to move even one of those ships, let alone 12. You think about the fuel, the crew. The chain of command. And then you realize, this wasn't authorized. This wasn't sanctioned. This was personal. Mick doesn't say much at first. Just stares out at the sea like he's remembering another time, maybe the storm in '89 that took 2 of his shipmates. Maybe that hot, silent tension of waiting on deck while depth charges pounded the water in '95. Maybe something else entirely. Eventually, he speaks, "They're not here for me." You glance at him. Confused, "They're here because they know I'd be here for them," he adds, softer. "And they know what that boat meant." And that's when you start to understand who Mick really is. Not just a veteran. Not just a fisherman. But the man who kept showing up when no one else did. When a junior enlisted sailor got burned by a faulty steam line, it was Mick who sat beside his hospital bed every night until his parents could fly in. When a fellow vet got evicted, Mick quietly paid 2 months' rent and left groceries on the porch. He didn't make speeches. He didn't wear flags. He just lived the code, and that notebook everyone mentioned. It comes out later that day, a water-stained, leather-bound thing with pages worn soft from handling. Inside, names. Dates. Coordinates. Letters from shipmates who never came back. Drawings of boats he dreamed of building but never had the money for. One page reads, "If I go down, let me go at sea." But not by another man's arrogance. The local sheriff drops by around noon. Nice guy, clean boots, a little nervous. He says the Coast Guard has traced the yacht, Celine, to a marina 3 counties south. The owner, some Silicon Valley startup millionaire named Brennan Walsh, wasn't even at the helm. His girlfriend was. No license. No experience. Just champagne and overconfidence. They thought they'd do a sunrise run. Walsh's lawyer already sent word, they're deeply sorry for the incident and willing to offer a settlement. Mick doesn't respond. Just folds his hands and asks, "Did she even see me?" The sheriff hesitates. Then says what we all feared, "She said she thought it was a buoy." That hits hard. The man survived 3 decades of active duty, buried friends in foreign lands, and now gets mistaken for a buoy by someone sipping Prosecco on a borrowed yacht. Later that evening, a small ceremony unfolds on the beach. No announcement. Just veterans from all over. Someone drove up from Georgia. Another flew in from Corpus Christi. You see wheelchairs in the sand, prosthetic legs brushing seafoam, service dogs sitting calm under a pinking sky. Someone lays out a folded American flag, not because Mick died, but because something sacred did. There's no anthem. No speeches. Just a silence so dense you feel it in your chest. And then, one by one, they approach Mick. A hand on the shoulder. A quiet salute. A whisper of "we heard." You notice, too, the small rituals. A Marine with burned scars hands Mick a brass coin with the word Semper Fidelis etched into its edge. A retired nurse tucks a photo into his notebook. It's her brother, lost in the Gulf. These aren't gifts. These are testimonies. At sunset, a smaller vessel, Vietnam-era patrol boat, rusted but proud, makes its way from the closest destroyer toward shore. At the helm is a Navy lieutenant in full dress blues. When he reaches the dock, he climbs out slowly, walks up to Mick, and without saying a word, hands him a small, simple box. Inside is a carved plaque. It reads, "For the one who never left the watch." You'd expect tears. Drama. Some explosion of emotion. But Mick just nods. One nod. A deep, solemn gesture of understanding that passes between men who've lived through things no Instagram story could capture. But the story's only halfway through. Because while Mick sits on that dock and absorbs the quiet gravity of what his brothers and sisters have done, the yacht owner finally notices something's wrong. Not from conscience. No, he sees it when a short clip goes viral. One of the veterans on the beach captured a slow pan of the skiff's shattered hull laid beside a folded flag, and overlaid it with a haunting bugle call. It's only 12 seconds long, but in 2 hours, it racks up 3.4 million views. Comments flood in. Who just sails away from something like this? This man served so you could cruise drunk. Not a mistake. That's neglect. And then, "I'm a corpseman. That's my old CO. Fix this." Brennan Walsh's PR team goes into overdrive. They release a statement, "We honor our veterans deeply." Mr. Walsh is committed to making this right. They offer Mick a check with a lot of zeros, he sends it back unsigned. Instead, Mick asks for something else entirely, let her say it. To my face. You're there when the black Escalade pulls up to the dock the next morning. The air's heavy with humidity and that particular Florida salt tang that clings to everything. The veterans are gone now, back to their homes, their lives, their quiet post-military missions. But the ships offshore remain. The fleet doesn't budge. It just hovers there, distant but looming, like some old god watching judgment unfold. And then she steps out, Kira Lane. 27. Designer sunglasses. Blonde like a yacht ad. Her sandals cost more than Mick's monthly VA check. But her posture? Uncertain. Her steps are slow. She's not performing. Not this time. A handler, probably PR, follows behind her like a shadow. Mick waits on a bench at the end of the dock. Same flannel shirt. Same steel blue eyes. His posture says, I've got time. But not for games. You follow the interaction with a strange lump in your throat. Not from sympathy, not yet, but from the rare tension of justice arriving not with handcuffs or headlines, but through choice. Through confrontation, she approaches, biting her lip. I didn't see you, she starts. I thought it was a crab trap. I swear, I didn't mean to. Mick raises a hand gently. Not to silence her, but to pause the whole moment. I know you didn't mean to, he says. But you didn't look. Silence again. This isn't courtroom drama. There's no shouting, no legal jargon. Just a veteran and a stranger standing on rotted wood with the weight of two worlds between them. He gestures behind him. You see them? She turns to look. The ships are still there, that's what looking gets you. That's what showing up means. Kira starts to cry. Not performative, not crocodile tears. Just quiet, sudden awareness. I was scared, she admits. I didn't know what to do. Mick nods. We've all been scared. But you still call it in. You still try. You stop the boat. A long pause, and then she does something unexpected. She kneels, not in some performative act of apology. But because the weight finally hits her, and her legs just give. The handler steps forward instinctively, but Mick waves him off. He stands, pulls a small paper from his back pocket, and sets it gently beside her. It's a printout of one of the pages from his notebook, a hand-drawn sketch of his boat, with one line underneath, my ship of peace, after all the war. No signature. No accusation. Just a truth laid bare. You watch her fold the paper in half and press it to her chest. That's when you start to think maybe, just maybe, this moment might grow into something more than guilt. The next day, the story breaks in earnest, not on cable news. Not through TMZ. But through an obscure military blog that runs a piece titled, When the Fleet Showed Up, a story of one man, one boat, and 12 ships of brotherhood. And then things explode, local news picks it up. Then national. But here's the twist, it's not Mick they focus on. It's the fleet. Why did these ships appear? Was this an unsanctioned operation? Are veterans organizing vigilante justice? The Pentagon is tight-lipped. The Navy issues a generic statement, all vessel movements were within training protocol. Which, of course, tells you nothing, and everything. One particularly sharp journalist traces back several of the ship movements. Turns out, half the ships weren't even on orders. They just showed up. Because a few active duty captains called in favors, rerouted drills, and asked forgiveness later. It was a coordinated ghost operation, no violence. No threats. Just presence, and that scares people in power more than anger ever could, because this wasn't a protest, it was a reminder. Back in town, Mick doesn't bask in the attention. In fact, he mostly avoids it. A neighbor catches him fixing an old tackle box the next morning. A local kid brings him donuts. Someone else leaves a gas card in his mailbox, but Kira. She starts to change, in a string of Instagram stories, quiet ones, stripped of filters. She documents her new plan. She's sold her stake in the yacht, turns out she co-owned it with Walsh. She's giving the proceeds to fund fishing boats for veterans struggling with PTSD. She doesn't name Mick. Doesn't try to fix her image. She just acts, and that's when the messages begin. from former sailors, from Marines in recovery, from widows, from sons. All of them saying the same thing: thank you for seeing him. It isn't redemption. Not entirely. But it's motion in the right direction. As for Brennan Walsh, he disappears for a while. The media shield him, as media does. A few months later, he's seen launching a startup in the blockchain health space. Whatever that means, but one detail leaks: he tried to sue Kira for breach of co-ownership after she sold the yacht. The case didn't go far. You know why? Because one of the lawyers assigned to his case had a brother on one of those ships in the ring, the unspoken network. The sacred chain, you start to feel it now. This wasn't just about a boat, it was about presence, it was about memory. And it was about what happens when the uniform comes off, but the code stays stitched under the skin, and if you think that's the end, just wait for what they did next. You thought the story peaked with 12 ships on the water and a billionaire's bubble popped. But that's not how these stories end, not the real ones. Because for people like Mick, and people like you, if you've ever served or loved someone who has, healing doesn't come from headlines. It comes from action. Quiet, meaningful, deliberate action. 3 weeks after the incident, something strange arrives in Mick's mailbox. No return address, no stamp, just a hand-delivered envelope with embossed navy blue trim. Inside is a card with a single phrase: come aboard. Room 117. No explanation. But Mick knows. You don't serve decades without learning when to ask questions and when to pack your bag, so he does. The next morning, he's escorted onto a naval base, quiet, controlled, routine. Except this time, the guards at the gate stand a little straighter when they see him. He's taken to a small, nondescript operations room. Inside, 5 people. 3 men, 2 women. All current military, though only one wears full uniform. And on the table, a scale model of a new vessel design. Mick furrows his brow. Is this about the boat? He asks, pointing. One of the officers smiles. It's about your boat. Turns out, the incident lit more than a social media fuse. It sparked a quiet initiative already whispered about in veteran circles, a plan to create a fleet of small, seaworthy boats that would be owned by veterans. Built with therapeutic principles, and deployed for everything from PTSD recovery trips to community fish and share programs. They're calling it the Watchline Project, and they want Mick's skiff to be the first model. They have engineers, funding, volunteers. But what they don't have is the soul of it. The heart. The blueprint of what that little 16-foot vessel meant. The thing no diagram can replicate, so they hand Mick a blank notebook. This one crisp, leather-bound, new, design it, one of them says. From the hull to the anchor. You tell us what it needs, and we'll build it. Mick doesn't say much, just nods, then does what he's always done. He gets to work. And over the next 2 months, with the quiet precision of a man who once calibrated radar systems in storms, he begins to craft the vessel of healing. He calls it the Sentinel. Fiberglass hull, reinforced for both shallow coastlines and deeper water. Fold-away seating for solitude or companionship. A built-in compartment for ashes and flags, for those who want their final voyage to be their truest one. Solar panels. An encrypted logbook app for vets to record stories, privately or publicly. A hot plate for coffee, because Mick insists that every morning on the water should begin the same way, and then something even more unexpected happens. The Selene, the yacht that destroyed everything, is seized by the state due to unpaid taxes and compliance violations, probably expedited by a few quiet calls from people whose names never appear in newsprint. It sits there in dry dock. Stripped of luxury. No more white leather seats. No more champagne coolers, and the veterans? They buy it, with donated funds and public support. They buy the broken vessel that once symbolized arrogance, and they convert it, steel panel by steel panel, into a floating memorial. Not a museum. Not a mausoleum. A living memorial. They rename it, The Reckoning, docked permanently at a naval museum, but mobile for ceremonial voyages. Mick visits it once, stands beside the repainted hull, runs his hand along the side, and says, sometimes the thing that hurt you becomes the thing that helps someone else heal. But only if you make it so. Meanwhile, the Sentinel is completed. 4 identical boats are built and stationed across coastal cities. All crewed by volunteer veterans. They offer free trips to any vet, anytime. No paperwork. No questions. Just a name and a life jacket. The impact is immediate. A retired Air Force mechanic from Oklahoma drives 900 miles just to spend 3 hours fishing off the coast of Savannah. Says it's the first time in 12 years he's felt like he could breathe. A Gold Star mother pours her son's ashes into the water from one of the Sentinel boats, flanked silently by a half-circle of vets who never knew him, but knew the sacrifice. A teenage Navy brat, who never understood why her dad had trouble sleeping, now volunteers as a deckhand on weekends, just to listen. And Mick. He goes back to fishing, but he's never alone now. There's always someone waving from shore. A vet passing by. A kid who read the story. A Coast Guard cutter slowing respectfully when it spots the Sentinel on the horizon. You realize now, as you sit in this quiet corner of the story, that justice doesn't always wear a badge or hold a gavel. Sometimes, it arrives in the form of presence. Of purpose. Of people simply showing up, and then one day, Mick doesn't come home from the water. It's not a tragedy. It's not unexpected. He was 77, after all. They find the boat drifting just offshore, anchor gently dragging. No distress call. No struggle, just a cup of coffee still warm, and a single line written in that new leather notebook, watch kept. I am relieved. The funeral is not what you expect. Number 21 gun salute. No long-winded speeches. No polished wood casket flanked by security officers in starched uniforms. Instead, the Sentinel leads the procession, quiet in the water, engine humming low, the soft hiss of waves against the hull providing the only soundtrack. Behind it, a flotilla. Dozens of boats. All types. Some veterans' boats. Some local fishermen's. Even a few recreational sailors who heard the story and simply showed up. Each one bears a small white flag. Not for surrender. But for respect. The route curves along the coast, following the same path Mick traced 100 times in life. And at the very center of it all, his ashes, placed in the custom-built compartment he designed himself. He'd written instructions in his will, scribbled in the margins of his notebook, scatter me near buoy 14, where the sun hits the water just right. Let me watch the coast I swore to protect. And don't you dare cry too much, I'll be busy fishing. You stand there, on the dock, watching as one by one, the boats turn outward toward the horizon. And for a brief, almost magical moment, you swear you see 12 warships in the distance again, maybe real. Maybe imagined. Like ghosts guarding the last voyage of one of their own, then the words begin, not eulogies. But stories, one by one, veterans speak up. Over handheld radios. Over local speakers. Sometimes just shouting across the water. Remember when Mick fixed my carburetor in a thunderstorm and wouldn't take a dime? He taught me how to tie a bowline blindfolded. He stayed on the phone with me for 6 hours when I told him I didn't want to live anymore. He sent care packages to my kid while I was deployed. He never said, thank you for your service. He just said, what do you need? These aren't lines for legacy. These are the breadcrumbs of a life that fed people. That showed up. That stood still when everyone else rushed by. And perhaps the most powerful tribute comes not from an old sailor or a Marine with ribbons across his chest, but from Kira Lane. She speaks through a pre-recorded message, not wanting to intrude. Her voice trembles but carries conviction. I used to think veterans were hard. Angry. Cold. I was wrong. I was the one who couldn't see beyond my comfort. But one man changed everything for me. Not with a lecture. Not with guilt. But by showing me what it means to watch out for others. Mick didn't shame me, he taught me. And now I teach others. And that's how this story keeps going. You pause. Because now you see it clearly, this was never just about the luxury yacht, not about vengeance, not even about a sunken boat, this was about memory, about those invisible lines of duty that don't dissolve when the discharge papers are signed, about how the smallest boat can carry the greatest weight if the heart behind it is steady. And about the unseen justice that unfolds when presence becomes protest. So here we are, near the end. The waves are gentler now, the sky beginning to dim in that soft orange glow that always seems to say, you've done enough for today. You lean back. Let your shoulders relax. There's no more tension in the air. No more battles to narrate. Just the hush of the sea and the ripple of a man's life echoing outward through every life he touched. And if you're quiet now, really quiet, you might even hear the sound of fishing line spinning out. Not from a reel, not from a boat, but from memory. Cast into waters where grief softens, where pride lingers in the salt, and where justice doesn't come in the form of punishment, but of continuation. Maybe you didn't know someone like Mick. Maybe you did. But chances are, somewhere in your town or family or phone contacts, there's someone who served. Someone who gave more than they ever got back. And they don't need parades or pity. They just need to be seen. Really seen. That's what this story was. Not a war story. A watch story, because someone always has to stay on watch, so before you move on with your day, before you close the tab or tap into the next video, take a breath. Let your mind slow. Maybe turn your gaze to the window. Let the light touch your skin. Let yourself feel the presence of someone you miss or admire. Whisper a thank you, then let them rest, because the watch is yours now.